I don't remember anymore who first told me about Ironsworn, which is a tabletop RPG of perilous quests written by Sean Tompkin. I do remember when I first went to his website and how blown away I was not only by the graphic design, but the content and the fact that it was all offered for free. What you're looking at here is a print version of the material that was sent to me by the designer, and we're going to do a flip through here of some of the book's content, and in a later video I'm going to do a gameplay demo for you. The most significant thing for me was on the website and here on the book, this 3 ways to play section. It is guided, co-op, and solo, and everything you need to play is in here, although there are some downloadable materials on the website as well that are going to enhance your gameplay. All of it remains free, although this version is now available for purchase. Let me give you a look first at the credits here, because that's quite significant, of course. And you can see that the writing and design is by Sean Tompkin, and there are acknowledgments here, most importantly, to Apocalypse World. This is running on that engine. And I'm not going to go through the details of that rule set for you, but I will be discussing some of the significant things here that this game offers, because it has a really unique combination of abstraction and specificity that enables, in particular, what is of interest to me, which is the co-op and solo version. It seems to me there's been a lot of interest in this system, and deservedly so, and because this print version has just become available, I haven't really seen a page through of it, so I'm going to resist the temptation to deviate too much from the organization that Sean Tompkin has made in the book, which is, generally speaking, I think pretty good, but I will be moving to the back of the book a little bit out of order to show you some context for it. The system itself runs on, you can play the entire game with just 2 D10s and a D6, although there is a suggestion of bringing in 2 other D10s to use as oracle dice. So this is what you're working with in terms of the dice, and let's just take a look now and page through this wonderful layout of the book and start by showing you again the credits here and the notes to the acknowledgments for the mechanics and inspiration, playtesters, special thanks, image credits. The images that are here, you will note immediately, are different than you'll see in many or most RPG books, and very, very evocative of the theme that happens. There's a general introduction to the basics of the game, and we'll look at that. Of course, character creation. These are the moves that are grouped thematically. Again, this is running on the Apocalypse World engine, so if you have some familiarity with that, you're going to recognize some of the larger constructs here. You are creating a world, and of course you could take this out of that world, but you are creating a world, the Ironlands, and it has certain regions, and there are well, what's known as truths, or the backstory of these regions. There is a listing of foes and encounters that you may have. It's not too extensive, but it is meant to be a springboard for you, as is written many places in here. A lot of this material is meant to be a springboard for your imagination and storytelling. This is a narrative-based RPG, and you will see a lot of abstraction in terms of things like monster stats, for example, where they're very, very few, and you're meant to fill in a lot of the details narratively. The oracles part we'll take a deep look at. That is key to how this works, certainly for solo and co-op play, and even if you're playing with a GM. The scaffolding here is very, very useful to move the story forward, and there is a longer discussion of having a campaign if you wish to do that, and how that might work, and an index that I have to say, happily, I've used it so far to great effect. So everything that I've tried to look up, I have found thus far in the index. We open up here and can see right away that this picture is extremely evocative of a place and the solitary nature, really, of what you are encountering. Now, again, it's stated here that, right here, it's primarily intended for solo and small group play. 1 to 4 players plus a GM in guided mode is ideal. When I do the demo, I think I'm going to be creating 2 characters to start because I want to show the interactions between them, but I definitely at some point want to play this just starting out with 1 character because the rule set really does support that type of play, I think. This is an example of the character sheet, and I'll show it to you printed out. The stats that you are creating are very, very basic, and they are suggested to you here. This is sort of a summary of all the moves that you can do. The action, roll, and die. We're not going to go over the rules too much, but it is quite clearly explained here that when you make a move, what you're doing is you are rolling 2 challenge dice, which are the 2 10-sided die, and then you're rolling your action die, which is the D6. You're adding on any relevant stats that you have to the D6 to come up with what is known as the action score. And then you're comparing that action score as against the rolls that you're getting on the challenge dice. And whether or not your action score is greater than or not greater than the challenge dice is going to determine the type of impact you have. Now here, it's a combat example, so it's whether it is a strong hit, a weak hit, or a miss. So for example, if the sum of your action die number exceeds both of the D10 rolls, that counts as a strong hit or a strong success. If it exceeds one but not the other, that is still a success but is weak. And if it is a miss, it is below both of them. And this is really the basic structure that guides everything in the game. There is a special discussion about what will happen if you roll a match on your D10s. But that is the basic fundamentals of the game, and the various moves and encounters and things that you do fall into these categories, and then it is up to you to determine narratively, for the most part, what the implications of that are. There's a little discussion here of what you do if you're playing the GM and how you interpret this. There are stats on the character sheets. One of them is momentum, that are moving stats going up and down during the course of the game. This will be familiar to you if you've played other systems that have changing types of stats like this that depend on how successful you are. So if you have positive momentum in one direction, you're moving up, and negative, you're moving down. And you can use this momentum track to impact die rolls in the future, and then if you use it to do that, you have to reset it. So there is a dynamic aspect to that, and it's called burning momentum if you want to use it to impact the challenge die, and what you have to do to reset it, and what happens if you move into a negative track. We can see here too that when we get to the damage aspect here, we have a same type of abstracted type of damage, and we see that there are different categories, narrative categories of harm. So there's troublesome harm, dangerous, formidable, extreme, or epic. And this ties into what we'll see later on in terms of combat and how the nature of combat is abstracted. You're not actually even carrying any specific types of weapons when you do combat. You are encountering different levels of foe, and based on that level of foe, you will then follow how much potential harm is inflicted on you and what the implications of that are. Ditto for the stress here. This is also another type of damage that you can encounter, and you can see again, this is really a narrative description of what happens to you to modify the stress value. So something that's dangerous is a distressing incident or upsetting failure. formidable is more to something horrifying or demoralizing, extreme, heartrending, or traumatic. Again, very abstracted, tied into narrative and story, but that's how this system works. Characters have no classes and no races. They are all human characters. What differentiates the characters are various assets that they can carry, and the assets themselves are categorized in a narrative manner. And there are asset cards that do come at the website that need to be printed out. They're not in the book, but I will show you an example of them where you can see that you populate your character with, and I realize we haven't gone through character creation yet, but here are example of some of the asset cards. There are companions, there are paths that you can choose, and there are, as shown here, another path card. You will choose 3 of these when you start your character, and this is how you're going to differentiate your characters from each other and give your characters some character, as it were. We talked about the Oracle dice at the very, very beginning. There are a number of tables to roll on that are Oracle tables, and I think this is one of the many ways in which this rule set shines for solo and co-op play, and probably maybe even for GM play, although I'm not so sure about that. Here's the main Ask the Oracle table, and it's sort of what you would expect. You are coming here when you seek to resolve questions or discover details or ask something of the world in which you are in. If you do solo RPGing already, this will be familiar to you. It's giving you some suggestions on how to use this table. You can draw your own conclusion and decide your answer, and then roll on the table if you ask a yes or a no question. You could also come up with 2 different questions and decide that one of them is likely, roll on the table, see what happens, and determine whether or not that is going to happen, and if not, it's the other one. Or you can just use this to kind of brainstorm. Now, what is wonderful about the use of oracles here, and this is where I want to go to the back of the book, is that in addition to this basic table, there are quite a few other oracle tables in the book that are thematic, and they provide different types of randomized information that you may need. I think when playing solo RPGs, sometimes what will happen to me is that I'll say roll on a percentile table to ask a question. It comes to be ultimately another yes or no. I'm asking another question, and it just starts to feel like a dead end, or it starts to feel like where I've gone to get a random answer or a random direction is actually just leading me back to me having to come up with the direction. And that can take me a little bit out of the experience that I'm trying to simulate of playing with someone who's creating problems or aspects to the story for me. What we have here in the back of the book, starting on page 174, are these additional oracle tables. And there is, actually I should start here and show you the discussion of them, because it will explain to you how you can roll your oracle dice that we were talking about just earlier on page 22 to generate your number. You can check the roll against that table and then consider your answer in the context of the question that you asked. And here's the key. It says, if the answer is difficult to interpret for your situation, you can then look up or down, sort of move around on the table, switch over the digits to see if that helps. If you get your answer, you're all set. However, if you are not happy, you can roll again, try again, or go to these further oracle tables. The first 2, the action and the theme tables, I think are the ones that probably will come into play the most, because you can pair these together to give a sense more of direction to an answer for a question. So for example, let's just give this example here. I'm really not going to do any gameplay, but I want to show how this works. Let's say you are you're asking a yes or no question, say, I see this gleaming object in the distance. What is it? How do I get there? Should I get there? Some questions like this, and you're just kind of getting, the yes or no is not really guiding you narratively. So you could turn to this action and theme, these two tables, and just do a roll. So let's see, we rolled an 88 here. What did we get? We got release, okay? And on the theme, we got, well, we either got a 20 or a 2. I didn't really determine that. So we either have release ability or release honor. That description is probably, if you're actually working within the story, enough of a narrative hook to populate your next move with narrative and to give you a direction to go in that isn't just an answer to a yes or no question. So for example, let's say we went with release ability, whatever that might mean. I didn't give you a story here, but what that could mean is you look to your character, what you've been developing, what you've been struggling with, to see that whatever it is that is in that direction that you've been wondering about whether you should travel to is going to be something that will help you with that ability struggle that you've been having. For example, again, this is completely out of context. I'm just trying to show you how these additional oracle tables can work. And then there are basic other tables here for regions of the world. We haven't seen the world map yet, but this will tell you perhaps where you might travel to, specific locations you could find there, descriptions of those locations, and settlement names if you need them. So this is material that can help you populate your world with detail, settlement troubles, more getting into traditional like D100 tables that you might be rolling on, but it's all contained here and it's all tied to the world that you're already playing in. Some character goals, character descriptors. You could use this if you were creating an NPC that you were encountering, for example. Different names that you might find, elf names, other names. There are elves, and I don't know if there are dwarves, but there are elves that you could encounter, although this is not a playable race for you. Combat action table is great because the combat is extremely abstracted, and you may wish to add some specificity that you're not creating to the actions of your opponent, and you could do so by rolling on this table. So that would determine, for example, that they're making it more of a precise attack or more of a power attack, or all of a sudden they're coordinating with allies. Some background information about the world, Mystic Backlash, and plot twists, and some challenge ranks that we will not really discuss right now. It's a little too off topic. So let's move back to where we were here. That's a further discussion of the oracles and the really detailed support that this system gives to the solo and co-op player. Equipment. This is a great example to show how this system is abstracted, and it's important to understand that before you get into it, because if you're expecting to walk around and pick up this type of two-handed axe and this type of bow and arrow, you're not going to find that here. In Ironsworn, you don't worry too much about equipment. You have a supply tract, which is an abstract representation of your general readiness, and you are considered to be armed and armored as appropriate to your vision for the character. So again, you can give yourself what you want if that is going to be fulfilling your narrative vision of the character, but you're not going to be going to an equipment table or a store and buying a bunch of things. The flow of play. You start by envisioning the current situation, and even with character creation, which we haven't even gotten to in the book yet here, you start by envisioning your character. You are given this flow chart here in terms of asking and answering questions and then moving on, what your action is doing to trigger the further narrative, and then we get to here what I discussed earlier in terms of the categories of a strong hit, a weak hit, or a miss, and then moving on. Very clear, but also very dependent on you bringing the story to the game. And here we get to the character creation part, which is quite easy to do, and you can see this just very evocative artwork of the focus on, I think, the individual and the character, the face here. We're seeing, looking into the eyes of this character, and that is, I think, a very appropriate image for the feeling that this game gives you when you play it. The first thing you're doing is you're just envisioning this character. Before you jump into the mechanics of your character, consider her motivations, interests, skills, personality, and weaknesses. I haven't really talked at all about the overall concept of this game, but you are, as a character, going on quests that are described as vows that you have of various strengths, desires that you have to fulfill, and things that you have to do. And that motivation is very important in who your character is. But people want to know about the stats, so we will get to that right now. You have 5 stats, and each has a value just from 1 to 3. So when you make a move and roll this dice, you're adding one of your stats to that action die. And again, the action die is a d6. So we're talking here about relatively low values because you're rolling the action die and then you're adding a stat, which is only going to be a value of 1 to 3. Your basic stats are something called Edge, which is quickness, agility, and prowess in ranged combat. Heart, courage, willpower, empathy, sociability, and loyalty. Iron, physical strength, endurance, aggressiveness, and prowess in close combat. Shadow, sneakiness, deceptiveness, and cunning. And wits, expertise, knowledge, and observation. Are you rolling? No. You are arranging these bonuses across the 5 stats in any order. 3, 2, 2, and 1. That's it. That is your basic character creation there for your stats. You have health, which is ranked from a 0 to a +5, and it sort of goes up and down. Here is the character sheet, and I guess I can show it to you. I have one printed out larger. It's probably a better visual right now to take a look at here, where your health is going to be on this track going up and down. We have supply that we talked about that is abstracted in terms of all the things that you have to help you get the job done. Spirit, which we haven't really gotten into, and this momentum that I talked about earlier that also rises and falls and gives you something that you can use to mitigate die rolls. Here are your basic stats here, and there are social bonds in the group that can be established between you and others that can impact the encounters that you have and the success or the likelihood or success of failure of those encounters, and these vows or quests that you undertake. You can see here these 5 categories of vows. We talked about these briefly in terms of the NPCs and that you would encounter in the game as well, in terms of, narratively speaking, how difficult they are for you to deal with. Are they merely troublesome? Are they dangerous? Are they formidable? Are they extreme? Or are they epic? And the experience that you will get, depending on the nature of this vow, is going to vary. And it is up to you to decide that. So the burden is on you as the player to say that this quest or this vow that I'm undertaking, I view for my character as merely troublesome, or I view this as extreme or epic. So as the player, as a solo player or playing co-op, you will need to be responsible for that, the management of that and the assessment of that early on. All right, let's move on. We didn't talk about the debilities, but we will get to that when we in the book. Again, I'm not going to go through every single thing here in terms of exactly what this means, but we talked about these aspects of the character creation sheet, and obviously the actual rules are going to explain to you more about what this means. The asset types, again, we touched on. You can have companion assets that travel with you. You can have certain combat talents. It's up to you to determine or choose what types of assets you want. You can mix them. You could have various types of paths that you are on that is more of a larger direction for your character with impact on the ways in which that direction may be coming into play during certain encounters, and whether that asset is going to give you a benefit for those. And there are an explanation of how you can Select 3 assets when you create your character, and then how you can acquire additional aspects with experience points when you are advancing through the stories. Explains about how to use companion abilities. I personally always like to travel with some type of familiar, so that is definitely something that I will be doing with my character. Equipment, again, you're going to be making a note of your equipment, but basically you're just assuming that you are equipped to do what you want to do. The book itself offers a lot of interstitial commentary, summary on what you're meant to do, and this is a great review, and all of these that are throughout the book have their page numbers referenced back to where the explanation of the rules are, and it makes it really simple to go back and refer as needed. So that is quite well done also, and again ties into what I was saying about the index and the support within the book for using the book. That seems to me to be terrifically done. Here's the chapter on the moves, and the moves are going to be thematically organized here in terms of different types of moves, and there's an example of combat here, a glossary of moves that come before the explanation of the moves, and then here are the categories of the moves. There are adventure moves, and it will explain to you what they are and when you decide that you are doing something that would require one of them. You can make camp. Undertaking a journey is something that comes up a lot because you're moving from place to place. There are relationship moves. So these are basic interaction moves. When you encounter somebody in the environment, you will be choosing some type of a relationship move as what you are rolling your action die in conjunction with. We talked briefly about bonding, but I'll just mention it here. When you spend significant time with a person or community, you can then create a bond or attempt to create a bond that will, if successful, come into play later on. So that is part of the fabric that is going to be knit together as you travel through the world. Of course, there's combat moves, and these are indicated here, and they will be referred to quite a bit, of course, when you're doing combat. But again, you have to use a lot of judgment here in terms of what you are selecting as the relevant combat move for that time, when the fight is going to end, and what that means. Here's something that is important. It's referring to this pay the price, and I'm just going to flip to that, even though I'm sort of trying to keep to the order of the book, because this comes into play a lot. Pay the price is a table. What this means is that if you have a negative outcome, and it's not just in combat, it can happen in other times. If there's a negative outcome, you need to choose one of these things. The first is make the most obvious negative outcome happen. So that is just you telling the story, you figuring out what would be the most negative outcome for whatever it was that you were trying to do. If you don't want to do that, if you want a little more guidance, you can go to the envisioning of 2 different negative outcomes, choosing one as more likely, and then going to that Ask the Oracle table, rolling on it, and seeing what you get. And if you get a yes, you make that outcome happen. Or you can roll on this table. And if you want a little bit more direction from the story, or more suggestion of direction from the story, or from the rule set, let's say, or from the fictional GM, or whatever you're considering it, you could do this. So for example, you could roll on the table, and it's a D100 roll ultimately, to determine, well, what are the contours of this negative outcome? Well, it could be, well, sorry about that. I was been so carried away and involved in this that my battery died and I didn't notice. And I'll just pause to say that it's probably appropriate that happened, because this is an incredibly involving system. And maybe it's because it speaks to the desire that I have to make as much use of RPG material as I can when I'm playing solo. But I think for the solo, especially for the soloist, or even people playing in very small groups, what I find can happen when looking at material is it's almost like there's both too much material and not enough material in systems. So if you're looking at systems that have a ton of material, you can only end up using a fraction of it. And then yet when you are using that material, because of course it's not meant for solo work, although this is, but a traditional RPG is not, obviously, and that's not the fault of the RPG, but when you're modifying it to play solo, I find I have to jettison so much material to make it work for what I want. And the gift here really from Sean Tompkin for the solo player is that this works for that. And it's somehow really incredible to me that he managed to make something that will work not only for solo, but for two people playing together against a system, or, not necessarily against, but you know what I mean there, without a GM, and for a group as well. And it's the same rule set. And well, it's just extraordinary that was done. Anyway, back to this. This is, again, another example of more scaffolding. So you could roll on this table if you wanted a little more direction in the answer that you got for the fact that you were paying a price. You could roll on the table and determine, for example, the current situation is going to worsen. So you can't change your situation. It's actually going to get worse. Or here you're separated from something. Maybe you're separated if you're playing with someone, or you're playing two characters. Maybe you're then forced to send them in different directions. That would be very interesting if you're playing by yourself, to kind of manage travel into different places. We haven't even gotten to where you will be physically, but there will be options to go in different places. So this is another example of how there's more material for you if you want or need something more than just a yes or a no. And here we have back to the endure harm. We talked about that, how you will determine what type of physical damage you are suffering. And we have, of course, the face death here. So you can see, and I'll just start to page through, but everything that all the options are giving you further options to get an answer, more specificity from the system if you want. Now, this is an important part of the book that I don't want to gloss over, or an important part of the world that I don't want to gloss over, and of the rule set, which is that we'll just read what he has to say. Making and fulfilling vows is central to your character's motivations. These oaths drive your story and give you the means to gain experience and acquire new abilities. And when you embark on a quest, manage your progress on a quest, seek to complete a quest, or gain the rewards of a quest, make these moves. And this is definitely key, and during the beginning of play and throughout the play, you will be creating quests, vows for yourself. There are different types of vows that will be what is guiding you to motivate you, and even that gives you a roll. You're rolling on your heart stat to determine what is going to be the impact of this vow on you, gaining momentum, losing momentum, etc. When you are succeeding in a vow, you will be giving yourself progress. And again, this is something, I touched on this earlier, and if you buy or download this material, you'll certainly come to understand this as you look through it. You are going to be responsible for determining the significance of the vow, the significance of the success, and the impact of the success as far as progress and experience goes, and what happens when you are fulfilling that, and how you will be advancing that. We just looked at that fate and the outcome of the moves. We looked already at this basic oracle table. And here we get to the actual world that you are in. And in fact, I think, though this is chapter 4, it's a good idea to go earlier into this to create the world that you are in, and there's a lot of guidance here for the various regions, and it says somewhere, I can't remember where, that it says here, the detail is intentionally light, consider it a sketch on canvas ready to be adorned with the vibrant colors and details of your story. So I suppose you could choose to just ignore all of this. I personally would not, but you could choose to ignore all of this, but it is giving you an overall general map, and this is also downloadable here from the website, where you can, if you choose to, have a larger version of it that you can use to map things out. It's giving you suggestions of features, and as is the case throughout this book, the layout and the artwork, though it is black and white, is just gorgeous and very appropriate thematically to the feeling of this story and of this world. The truths are going to be categories for sections that will give you some background and flavor to the campaign, and there are some suggestions here of them, and of course you can just make your own, and this also is available downloadable if you want to print this out and mark them off so that you are filling in things about the regions in terms of their religion, I think it's just called rituals, but mysticism and things of that nature. So it's going to give you suggestions on how to build that in. Here we get to the section of the book with the NPCs and the both people and animals that you could encounter. I will say, and I guess should just again go to what he writes here himself. This may be surprising to some viewers or readers. Because gameplay in Ironsworn is centered on the abilities and actions of your character, NPCs are primarily represented through your fiction rather than mechanics. They don't have stats, assets, or tracks. Instead, the sample NPCs included in this chapter include some broad details to help guide their actions and the threat they pose in combat. So you're getting here to some very abstracted combat information, and we talked about this earlier, but they will be having a rank, and based on the rank, whether they're troublesome, dangerous, etc., and what type, it will describe what type of enemy they would be, and then how much progress you would get if you dispensed with them, or how much harm they would do to you if you did not. So it is extremely abstracted, and the suggestions here are springboards. You could play the whole game and just use exactly what's here, but you may also wish to create other types of monsters or creatures to encounter that are not here and base that on what is here. So if you didn't want a bear but you wanted some creature that was akin to a bear, you could map that and create it onto these, not really stats, but descriptors. So we'll just flip through, and again, it's not, there are some semi-standard things that you would expect, like here's a spider, for example, but it is not going to be excessive at all, and this is where you're going to have to bring, or you may have to bring, more of your own creation into the world here. We looked briefly at the oracles already. There's a whole chapter on oracles and explaining them, which I sort of already went through, already looked at how to use these tables, and it also explains how to use the oracles if you're doing guided play. So they're not just meant for the solo player. And this is, again, key, that when answers lead to more questions, I don't think I showed you this before, you aren't just limited to that. So it is like escalating is the wrong word, but it is an unfolding type of system here, where you have more material that you can turn to if you are stuck. And I think, again, you will be using this action and theme comes in a lot, even just one of the tables. If you need an action, if you need a verb to do something for you and you don't want to just come up with it yourself, you can roll on this D100 table for a choice that will tell you, okay, I rolled on secure. Well, that's going to give you, if you're actually playing this game, that's going to give you some help that you might need. So this table is extremely helpful, I think. We looked at these already. There are campaigns, and those would be interconnected game sessions, of course, and there is an explanation of how to go about starting a campaign and doing a campaign, and there is this material actually here at the beginning is useful just in general, whether you're playing a one-off or a campaign, that you need to create your character, create the world, which is the map we already discussed or showed, the background bonds that happen, the connections, the basic vow that you have that is going to be your major quest, really, and then your inciting incident, or what is starting here, what is propelling you into action to the beginning of the story. And then again, another very helpful campaign setup summary. I really appreciate this throughout the book, that these summary pages give you very clear steps in terms of what you need to have done, and also reference the page number, which, as I said, to everything I've looked up so far, this has been accurate. So it was nicely copy edited or proofread. That will refer you back, if you don't remember exactly what that means, to the page number where you can find the further description, and there is also an index in the book. This section here, the mechanics and the fiction, which is on page 203, I actually recommend looking at almost first when you open this book, because it explains the relationship between the mechanics and the fiction that you're creating in this game, and how the fiction is really guiding you, and what the moves and the die rolling is meant to do vis-a-vis the fiction. So I think, without going too much into detail, this is where, if you pick up this wonderful game, you should turn almost immediately, because understanding where the author is coming from in terms of the use of your own imagination, your own story, your own narrative, the fiction of the world that he's providing you as a springboard, and how that relates to the die rolling, is very important to setting your expectations for what the game can do and offer, and also what you need to bring to the table to play it and enjoy it most thoroughly. And this is just a further discussion of that, how to manage quests, what milestones mean. And this is very helpful in terms of progression and understanding, am I doing this right, or am I doing this the way, right or wrong is probably the wrong term, because again, throughout this, there is the sense from the author that, you should do what feels right to you, but there are certainly suggestions of how the author might envision a way of doing it. And then toward the back here somewhere, there is, this is again character advancement and what that might mean. A flow chart here for managing the quests that so you can have some sense of, am I done yet? Am I moving forward? When do I gain experience? I know for me, doing solo work, that's always hard when, obviously if I'm using a rule set that's not designed to be for me as the player and the GM, I have to kind of figure out, well, was that enough to gain experience, and what does that mean? And here is a flow chart that will help you ascertain that. Some general discussions here about solo play and playing if you are the GM and you're not doing that. Gameplay options in terms of number of players. What does it mean if you don't want to do a campaign, if you just want to do a one-shot? Discussion here at the very end, if you want to hack this and play it in other worlds, different settings, what this means, and giving some examples here, a high magic setting, if you want to play without the assets or in other genres. And then the book ends with, well, the book ends with an index, as it should, but the book ends before that with an extended example of play. This is something that I would also, after you read the fiction section that I mentioned about, I think that was on page 202, I would recommend flipping through, reading through this extended example of play. It's not going to make total sense if you haven't yet read the rules, but the way it is presented is excellent, because it does go through, walks you through really an explanation of how the various the die roll values are arrived at based on the character. And even though some of it won't make sense in terms of the specific moves, I think it's, for me anyway, as a learner, it's a useful framework to see how something plays out in the narrative context. then go back and read the rules, and then come back here and look through this again, and even more of it will make sense. But I really appreciate the fact that everything is laid out here. Oftentimes with examples of play, it's like the example of play is given because somebody doesn't know how to play the game, but then it's written as if somebody does know how to play the game, and that's frustrating, but that is not done here, I don't think. Another beautiful piece of art, or I honestly don't know if this is Photoshop material, and I think there was a credit to some iStock. I guess these are photos, but it's worth showing the image credits, because I think that's very important to make sure that those image credits are shown, since I am showing them here for you. So there's a look at the image credits. The art direction here, I guess it was done by Sean Tompkin himself, writing and design. I mean, amazing. I don't really know anything about his background, but it's got to be quite varied to come up with this, all of this. And here is the index, and I don't want to gloss over that, because that is extremely important to the ability to use the book effectively. And as I said, I find that this index was excellently done. And here is a final piece of art, very appropriate to end the book with. So that is a look inside the print version of Ironsworn, which is a tabletop RPG of Perilous Quests by Sean Tompkin. It is useful for guided, co-op, and solo play, and I will be bringing you some gameplay demos of this system sometime soon. Thanks for watching.